Hello, extra time.
They're important to the league not to get a hook because it damages your reputation. It makes people, when they read it, just laugh at you.
Simple enough. They're playing in the League One and they're playing in the Europa League and they're credit to the game in this country. Maybe we should get Stephen Kenny then to manage the Irish team.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Extratime Football Podcast. Your host Luke George. I say Macdara first. Join me once more. Macdara, how are you?
I'm very good, Luke. How are you getting on?
I'm fantastic. Season 12, episode 16 this week. Back at it after a week break with us in terms of schedules and all that. Unfortunately, our schedule sometimes is a bit too busy. Macdara, speaking of schedules that are busy, the fixture congestion list seems to be getting quite tight at the moment. There's a lot of football on this weekend.
Yeah, it's a really, really busy period, which is great. But the Ireland women's team begin their doubleheader for Euro 2025 qualifiers on Friday night against Sweden, and then they're away to Sweden in Stockholm on Tuesday. And Friday night's game obviously goes head-to-head with a full round of Premier Division fixtures and First Division fixtures. So I do understand the UEFA basically set those women's internationals for Friday and Tuesday, all these doubleheaders. The teams could decide to move the fixtures if they wanted to. So I know Ireland moved their Northern Ireland game previously in the Nations League to a Saturday. But what that means is you've one less day preparation, and potentially Sweden didn't want to move the game to Saturday. The game is on in the Aviva on the Friday night, but it's just a pity that it's taken away from the crowds, because obviously people are going to be at League of Ireland games on Friday night, whether they're going to go to the women's game in the Aviva. Then again, Eileen Gleeson mightn't have wanted one day less preparation ahead of Tuesday's games. And then we've John O'Shea. I'm going to say the John O'Shea friendlies are coming up for the men's national team next Tuesday, home to Hungary. So there's some media events happening on Friday, and then they're holding over some of that stuff will be embargoed just to give the women's national team a bit of space. But the slightly less fixtures in that, because of international call-ups, two of the Bank Holiday Monday games are off. So the Bows Shelbourne game set for Bank Holiday Monday. There's a full round of First Division and Premier Division fixtures on Monday. But the Bows Shells game is off, and the Galway Shamrock Rovers game is off on the Monday. And then the Dublin Derby in Tala between Rovers and Bows on Friday week is off. And they're due to kind of international call-up. So I think it's the two Estonian players with Bows, if I have that right. One Estonian player with Shamrock Rovers. I think Pico Lopez is off to Cape Verde, or is maybe getting married. I think he was clashing with that as well. And then there's some under 21 fixtures as well coming up that Ireland are playing. So that's, I think, why those fixtures are off, which will cause a bit of a fixture headache, particularly probably for Shamrock Rovers, because they have two of those games, and Bohemians, two of those games off as well. But maybe Rovers kind of look at their injury list and said, well, we might have more players back. But yeah, it just means it's all really, really busy with the Europa League game in Dublin last week. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And I'm lucky enough, I'm going to be Friday night at the press conferences in Wembley, because I'm going to the Champions League final. So I'll be listening to Carlo Ancelotti. Probably, I think they're the late press conference on Friday evening, so I'll be watching a bit of LOI TV and listening to them. And yeah, lucky enough to be going to the Champions League final on Saturday evening. So yeah, so we'll have loads of content up over the site over the weekend. And yeah, not complaining. It's great to have all these events happening on our doorstep, and we'll bring as much coverage as we can over the weekend.
Yeah, and the football doesn't even stop there when the club football starts with the Euros coming as well. It's just a festival of football the next month. Just you mentioned there about in terms of the John O'Shea internationals, and we'll be chatting to Paul O'Hare a bit later on, even with a bit of League of Ireland news too, so stay tuned for that. Just back to him, this fish congestion, we move on. I think he mentioned, was it the other day, and he said that it just seems mad that, and I agree with you, that it's mad that the women's national team is clashing with the League of Ireland. It's such a busy Friday night. It's very weird how the schedule worked out.
Yeah, I'd say it's because of the UEFA have set out the fixtures this way, and I don't, would they change a full round of fixtures for the women's national team? It's just the fact that the game is in the Aviva. They're probably looking. I don't know what the crowd will be. It was obviously big for the last game, above 30,000. That's when England came to town. A little bit different for for a little bit different for Sweden coming to town, and then the next match, the next home game, the France game is actually going to be in Porky because the Viva isn't available. I think we talked a little bit about that, and Tallaght Stadium 50-50 whether it might be available. They couldn't wait until the European draw was the 18th of June. So it's just a bit of a pity because it just takes away the game on the women's game is live on RTE on Friday evening, and people will be dual screening. Kids might have wanted to go, particularly to it's a younger demographic that's definitely going to the women's national team games, and it's a pretty crucial game. I don't think really anyone expected Ireland were going to be potentially taking points off England when they came to town, the European champions. But Sweden is a team that we drew with away in Gothenburg in the last qualifiers and only lost the game, the home qualifier 1-0. So it's really it's a crucial game. I think France is probably the more the difficult game at home, having lost. They did well, but having lost away 1-0. But yeah, it's just a pity that they're clashing. But it just takes a little bit of space away from coverage in the newspapers, on the websites, and on the podcasts.
Yeah, look, it's as I said, it's an unfortunate fixture clash. That game does take place this Friday, May 31st at 7:30 in the Aviva Stadium, as Macdara mentioned. Speaking of the Aviva Stadium, there was a massive game that happened in the Aviva Stadium this time last week, as we record on Wednesday, and that was the Europa League Final. Macdara, we haven't spoken since that game. I suppose even not really more about the game itself, but just in terms of the build up to the game, how did you find in terms of covering it? What was the city like, say, 5-6 hours for kickoff?
Yeah, it was a really good game to cover. I was thinking back to, I'd go to a fair bit of Leinster games, and I went to the Champions Cup final in the Aviva last year. Now, Leinster lost that one as well as last weekend's one. But the whole thing was slightly underwhelming because, I hopped on a Dublin bike to go down to the stadium, and it was kind of like a home game. And then obviously the result didn't go its way, but it didn't feel like a big European game. This felt slightly different, and I wasn't really invested in what the result was, but I think people were very interested in the Bayer Leverkusen story because they had gone into the game unbeaten, 52 games into the season. But then again, Atalanta was quite an interesting story as well. Now, I work in Ringsend, so it was really interesting on the build up to the day. The Leverkusen, they had chartered a lot of flights in. They took up their full allocation of 12,000 tickets. Atalanta took up slightly less, and that meant a lot of tickets went on resale. And I probably knew a fair few people that picked up tickets late on during the week to actually go to the game as neutrals. So the buses, the charter buses, came into Shelbourne Park. I was kind of joking that for once the funding of the greyhound industry was actually helping football maybe not football in Ireland, but it meant that that's where the fan zone was for the Leverkusen fans. They could drop the buses off there. They could kind of get beer or whatever. They kind of wander around Ringsend. I think the pubs in the area did very well. The Atalanta fans were using the RDS, and there was a big build up. There had been a lot of posters around the stadium. I was saying before, I'd been at the 2011 Europa League Final when Braga played Porto, and I was volunteer working in the media centre that day, and that kind of got lost amongst. It was the same week that Queen Elizabeth came to visit Ireland. Barack Obama came to visit Ireland, and the fact that it was two Portuguese teams, the stadium didn't sell out at all. It was kind of one. Even being in the media centre that day, it was like one press corps from Portugal. Whereas this time around, it was two really big press corps. Obviously, German press corps, Italian press corps, really big. And I was saying that, the only thing being lost at the minute was the posters for the game were kind of lost amongst all the local election and European election posters. But a huge amount of Gardaí around the streets. They probably got lucky with the two teams that they got. That if it had been Marseille and Roma, would have been maybe slightly different than Atalanta fans and Leverkusen fans. But they were able to kind of mingle well around the ground, although they were coming different entrances. Like the ticket barricade getting near the stadium was much wider than normal would be on the day. And really, it was a good run through for what it'll be like for Euro 2028. And hopefully Ireland will be there. We'll have a better chance of qualifying. They've given the home nations for the tournament as opposed to home nations as maybe would have been in the past, will have more chance of getting to the tournament. But, whether Ireland will qualify or not, maybe not. And you're kind of going with I think it's the 4 games that are going to be in Dublin. You kind of go, what it would be like those games with maybe not Ireland teams, or not Ireland taking part. I think this was a good example that actually Irish football fans were really interested in it. They tried to pick up the tickets, and I was thinking, if it's a Euro 2028 game with Switzerland and Sweden, and you've got 2 big cohorts of travelling fans coming in, I think it'd be great. I think it'd be great crack. Within the stadium, there was good segregation between the fans. I've never seen as many Gardaí around the place. They'd bust them in from all over the country. They'd kind of taken away leave. Even going into the stadium, I was going through the media centre. There was airport security. I had to put my bag through airport security to get in. Got patted down, which you wouldn't normally do when you're going in the media entrance. And even just the scale of, picked up the media accreditation the day before down at Marion College. There was big setup there for kind of corporate areas. And, Irish football fans, we can be as cynical as probably with the best of them. And just chatting to people on the day, people who were working, friends of mine who were at the game, people really enjoyed it. Like the guy giving me the accreditation the day before, he was a Bows fan. I was chatting to him. The people working in the media centre, there's somebody who does a bit of volunteer work at Shamrock Rovers. Somebody who used to work with Dundalk, they were in the media centre chatting to people who were doing various bits and pieces. So the volunteers, like they gave up their time the kind of day before the game, day of the game. Like the stewards were getting paid, but the volunteers, they got like two T-shirts branded for the game, like a hoodie. They got a pack with a football. And then the day after, on Thursday, there was a big event back down in the stadium with kind of food and drink, and people could take away various bits that were put up. Like people would have seen it was called the Dublin Arena. So everything was taken off with Aviva. The massive Aviva sign that is like on the facade on the east side of the stadium, that was all taken down. Even the urinals where they have ads like above the urinals, about like 30 ads in the jacks for like whatever, they were all filled with posters. So there were people taking them after the game. People were kind of taking them out. So that's how branded the stadium was.
Just a quick one, Macdara. Just why isn't it called Lansdowne Road? Is there any particular reason why it's called a Dublin Arena? But I know it's been used for years, and it was used in 20.
I don't know. Maybe they felt they didn't want to. Maybe the FAI didn't want it to be called Lansdowne Road again because it might remind people that it is the Aviva. And actually, that branding rights are up. I think I read it in one of the newspapers over the weekend that Aviva are in negotiations to extend that contract. So I think that's probably why the FAI maybe didn't want it to be known as Lansdowne Road. Okay. So that's kind of tends to be the case. So yeah, and then in terms of the atmosphere, it was brilliant. I went up to the press area was rammed down below, like just about enough space for everyone that needed. So the press conference room was really busy the night before. So I went to the press conference, really interesting to hear Xabi Alonso just very easily moving between Spanish, English, and German. Like there was an online translation, so you had to download an app, stick your headphones in, and then you could choose your language between 4 languages. Which was, just kind of shows the status of it. But on the match day, it was pretty rammed. So I went up at about maybe 90 minutes before kickoff up to the press area, and like the cohorts of the big traveling fans were already in. They were already singing, and they didn't stop from 90 minutes right through to the end. Like who's the
louder?
Leverkusen had more fans, but I was probably more impressed. Atlanta did a call and response within their own section in the second half, and it would go quiet and then it would ramp up again. It was really impressive. But the Leverkusen fans stayed right to the end. They stayed to the trophy presentation. They could have maybe headed off and got a last point before maybe they were going down to get the bus back to the airport. Say a lot of them were in on day trips, but it was really good. Like and it was an interesting game. Like Leverkusen, like they were second best, but I think the Lookman hat trick, added another element to it. It was Atalanta's first European trophy. Their only other senior trophy that won was the Coppa Italia back in the 60s. I think people, follow a little bit of Italian football. People probably saw them maybe beat Liverpool in the quarterfinal. Like, they're an interesting story. They don't play catenaccio. It's a real attacking play. They've developed this squad over the
even
years.
Macdara, so I can cross it. The tactics, obviously, I watch on the TV. Like, again, my only experience watching Atalanta, a bit in the Champions League last couple of years. Watched them the Liverpool game recently. How high they press. I don't want to get into too much of a tactical kind of aspect of the match because we wanted more of the atmosphere and the spectacle, but just was how impressive was the setup in terms of closing down Leverkusen. They couldn't get out for some parts of the game. I think it was the second goal when they closed down, squeezed the play, and Lookman's little flick inside to put it in the corner. It all came from a very high press. Only the 11 players were in the Leverkusen half pressing the ball. It was very impressive to watch.
Yeah, they knew what they wanted to do, and Gasperini had talked about having a setup that was going to do that. And it's a reminder, they hadn't lost a game. That Leverkusen had 52 games to come in, and people are probably very aware of the late goals that they'd got. Even in the semi-final, they actually were winning the tie, but they were losing the second leg, and they still went for it because they didn't want to lose that record. And you thought at halftime, okay, they're 2-0 down. In any other game, you probably go, it's out of it. But actually, if any team was going to come back, but they weren't allowed. They were a little bit better. I was a bit surprised that they left a lot of firepower on the bench, and they were probably better for the halftime substitute, but for about kind of 15 minutes, and then Atalanta kind of exploited it, and his hat-trick goal was absolutely brilliant. He came into the press conference afterwards, and he was so understated. People maybe saw there was a really good TNT did an interview with his old coach. He's from Lukeman's from Wandsworth, and his old coach talked about. He got quite emotional talking about him. Talked about how quiet he is, and maybe that didn't help his career earlier on because he blew out in the West Ham. Do I have that right? West Ham, and then
he was with Charlton. Charlton came through.
Yeah, and so he came in. With the man of the match, they come in, and he came in kind of halfway through Gasperini's press conference, and he kind of sat in the corner quietly, and he was sitting there in his jersey with his man of the match, with his winner's medal over his shoulder, and he was just kind of swigging water, and then he was really quiet. He was really understated, and you were kind of going, like, he scored a hat trick, but one of I think it was the guy from PA asked him a question about, did you ever think when you were, starting out at Charlton that you'd ever, win a European final? Obviously, probably thinking your man would come back and go, never, or whatever, his dream could do. And he actually said, well, yeah, I always had confidence in myself. It was really interesting for somebody who was really quiet. He actually had, it was like, yeah, no, I have confidence, but knocked it back. And he spoke so highly of Gasperini. He talked about how the first time he came in, from the very first conversations with him, he made him think of football in a different way and gave him the confidence. He also played him in a slightly different position. So, and no one had scored a Europa League final hat-trick. You had to go way back for a last European hat-trick as well. So, yeah, it all made for a really interesting experience, and probably better. People don't really remember the 2011 final that Porto won, probably because it was Villas-Boas, who kind of was pretty shit then when he went on, is now he's not even managing anymore. He's moved upstairs in his career. But I think, as I said, anyone I talk to, and looking at my own social media, various people around the game that you follow, players in the league, supporters of other club in the league, a lot of people seem to go to the game, and everyone seemed to really enjoy it, and I think it was a really good football story. It went really well for the FAI. UEFA sent out this press release afterwards, which they don't tend to do, just about how well the event went, thanking the volunteers, thanking the FAI, and they've had a couple of bad experiences of the Champions League with fan experiences. Last year in Istanbul wasn't great. Obviously,
Saint Denis as well in France was horrendous.
Big time, yeah, really bad. They ended up, settling, handing out financial restitution to people who had been caught up in that. And
even just think, cast your mind back to the Euros, the COVID Euros with Wembley and the horrendous police and there, where fans were losing their seats, and like I've been getting horror stories the last 5 years.
So I think it went really well from that point of view. There wasn't even and no one even stuck onto the pitch to get a selfie or try and get somebody's jersey. Like I don't think the only complaint seemed to be that there seemed to be a buffet meal promised in the media centre, and it was sandwiches. Sandwiches very nice. Came a little bit late, but that's probably the only the only negative thing I can think of.
What was the pre-match meal that there? What was the pre-match? Was it curry?
So no, there was no pre-match meal. It was sandwiches.
Oh, just sandwiches.
Yeah, so I know you did one of the Ireland games, and the FAI would have done a bit of chicken curry, maybe some beef stroganoff, and a vegetarian option. So no, little bit disappointing from that point of view.
That's very disappointing. No curry. That's very disappointing.
But I'll be able to give you a report back on what the security situation is with Wembley on Saturday. Probably, you're looking at Real Madrid fans well used to traveling to various grounds around Europe for the Champions League final. Amazing record that they have in recent past. Obviously, big game for Borussia Dortmund. They'll bring huge amounts of support to it as well. So I've never done a press game in Wembley, so I'll report back on what the pre-match meal is for that next week.
This, just speaking of security, this is a big game for the English FA as well, because this is going to be, like you mentioned, Euro 28. This is where the final is going to be 7 years on from the last one disaster, as I just mentioned 2 minutes ago. So this is a big game for them to make sure they get right security-wise. And like you said, like Dublin, by all accounts, you wait to send out a memo saying how happy they are with the performance of the Irish officials. So this is a big game for the FA now to make sure that there's no hiccups along the way. As I said, mentioned already, 3 years ago was an absolute disaster.
Yeah, it's one of the things that came out, and I haven't watched that. I think we'd not great reports on the Netflix documentary on that Euro final, but the way Wembley has built up around Wembley, there's a lot of residential area, high-rise residential. Maybe unlike think back to other Champions League venues, like Atletico's stadium is kind of out. There's a big area around it, so the ticket check are well away. Similarly with the ticket check for in Istanbul, the San Siro, people might have been, if they've been over in Milan before, there's a big plaza area, so they can kind of deal with that. Whereas Wembley, it's not as easy as that. With Dublin, it's probably similar. Now, the IRFU own a lot of the houses on Lansdowne Road, and I think because it was a one-off, I said the ticket checks were wider than normal. But I did see even on match day, I was going up to the ground probably about 5 o'clock, and actually people who hadn't got tickets who were saying, actually, I live in that house, they were able to go on. But it is different in Wembley, so I'll be interested to see what the ticket checks will be like and how close you can get to the stadium, because that seems to be one of the big issues for that final. But it was also the fact, England were there. It was the post-COVID release of everything. There was a kind of a multitude of things. But no, it's a big game. Like where the Europa Conference League final is on in Athens. We spoke a little bit, Ireland fans, it's in the same stadium where there was issues for Ireland fans when Ireland played Greece earlier on. So whether anything comes from that game, that game on Wednesday night, remains to be seen. But yeah, it is an important game because, as you said, Wembley is taking, a considerable amount of these Euro 2028 games.
Just curious about Alonso. How long before in the press conference was Alonso asked about his Irish background in terms of playing in GAA? And
Mark McCadden got the question in. The press officer had kind of called on Mark, and there was microphones going around. I suppose they wanted to make sure the audio was good, and someone behind Mark grabbed the microphone, and he thought he might miss it, but the press officer, she went, "No, we'll take the final question there." So Mark asked the question, and he got the answer. Alonso was well able to talk. I was straining to hear, could I get a slight Meath accent from him, but it wasn't quite the case. But he gave us a good answer about remembering his time fondly from his time studying as he didn't use the phrase Spanish student, but that's the one we would use. And he also spoke a little bit about, a warmth from Ireland from his time at Liverpool. I suppose that comes back to the amount of Liverpool fans who are based here in Ireland as well. So yeah, it was the last question in the press conference at about like 20 minutes in. So yeah, no, Mark did the honours first.
Yeah, I do love how the truth gets stretched over 20 years. Where he lived here for a month apparently, and it was a year, and he's under 14 All Ireland medal. It's amazing how it gets stretched after.
Oh yeah.
It's great.
It's up there with Socrates winning the Collingwood Cup for UCD.
Oh, UCD, that's another fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
Well.
Complete fake news before fake news was ever a term.
Last question back there. What are you looking forward to seeing for the game now on Saturday night? I know you mentioned two teams there. Madrid obviously heavily favourites. Probably the romantic story is Marco Reus to leave with a Champions League medal in his back pocket. It's probably the romantic if you're into that sort of stuff. What are you hoping to see?
I've it's always Real Madrid to come. I think the Bellingham story is quite interesting because that's probably something new from Real Madrid because they've been in the final so often over the last few years, but he was voted Player of the Year in La Liga, and that's kind of voted on by fans, the club captains, and a panel of experts. And he had a really, really good season. I think it was 19 or 20 goals he got in the league. I'm hoping they might put him up for media duty on Friday. They may or may not, but it would be great if he is up because I think that's something a bit different from Real Madrid. I think we kind of know the Modric story, and we know Ancelotti's an interesting character as well. Always interesting to hear from as well. A real a thinker of the game, and it's a autobiography. I'd recommend his autobiography. It's well worth it. It's one of those ones which people recommend even from a management speak point of view, and he talks about managing up, which I heard Damien Duff talk about on Richie Sadlier's podcast today, managing up and managing down. So it's probably the Bellingham for me on the Real Madrid side. And then it's Dortmund because we haven't seen them. It's quite a mature Dortmund squad that are coming. They're obviously going to be they're not favourites, as you say, and hopefully they'll give them a good game. It's a bit different from last year. It was all about Man City. So I think there's some interesting angles that will come from this, even though it is Real Madrid again, and just going to something in Wembley, such a big stadium, such an iconic stadium. It'll be that. Oh yeah, and Lenny Kravitz was playing the pre-show. What do they call it? The kickoff show beforehand. So usually I don't know who the person is, but I know who Lenny Kravitz is. He's more my era. So yeah, looking forward to that ahead of the game as well.
Okay, I didn't know Lenny Kravitz come there. I was laughing actually. I mentioned Ancelotti. I seen his best ever 11. He managed. He named the 11 there, I think last year, and I still haven't got over the fact he didn't name Seamus Coleman starting 11.
Yeah, disappointing now.
Yeah,
I think he's trying to forget his. Maybe he's trying to forget his time at Everton.
Yeah, right there. I'll let you go.
Thanks, Luke.
Coming up next, we chat to Paul O'Hare about the League of Ireland and also about the Irish games coming up, so please stay tuned.
And there's kind of a lot of grumbling about maybe we don't have enough Premier League players, but in terms of the Championship
But what's the point in grumbling about it?
But the step
I can't hold about it, can I? If they're not playing the play, what's the point of me grumbling?
But the step up to international football in the Championship is it easily managed?
Well, I tell you back there when we played in 2002, what's the point of me grumbling? We had lads who were all at the bottom of the Premier League, real scrapping away, Kince and Matty Holland, and I had Gary Breen who hadn't even got a club. What's the point of me grumbling? So I don't subscribe to that, you just... Whatever it is, whatever I've got, I'll get them together and make the best of them and try and make sure we qualify. Grumbling is not one of the things I do.
You can subscribe to each new episode of the Extratime.ie Sportscast on iTunes. Please give a rating or add a comment there to let us know your views.
Welcome back to part 2. Did I say Paul O'Hare's joined me again? Paul, how are you?
Good, thanks, Luke. Yeah, very well.
This is our first episode in a couple of weeks, Paul. So we've got a couple of big things to go through. Before we even get to maybe the managerial roundabout, there's a big game last Friday in Tallaght.
Yeah, it was a really interesting game. It was one of those where you were sort of going into it going, Rovers can't really afford to lose here because they got 9 points behind Shelbourne. and then they go and lose to Shelbourne, and they are now 9 points behind Shelbourne in third. Derry City obviously second, 6 points behind Shelbourne. So look, it was a statement win from Shells. Came courtesy of 2 penalties. Rovers probably were the better team. Certainly created more chances. And Stephen Bradley did admit after the game that, look, it's a big challenge for them now to overhaul 9 points. But he was very much up for the fight. Like, he wasn't at all conceding or waving any white flags to Duff and to Shells. But, there does come a point, like Bradley, would be quite consistent in his message of not panicking, and we're playing well and we're creating chances and we're doing this and we're doing that. And, that is kind of well and good. But, we're not 7 or 8 games into the season now, and it's another kind of sluggish start from Rovers, and they'll eventually get going. We're over the halfway point of the season now. And look, Rovers were good and should have been out of sight. I think after certainly approaching half an hour, they had 2 or 3 really good chances to put the game to bed good and early, and they were by far the dominant side. And then there was this just weird run of injuries that they got. Daniel Cleary went off. I think it looked like a hamstring injury. Then Josh Honohan goes off with a clash of heads. And a week later, judging by Bradley's comments today, Thursday afternoon, Josh Honohan sort of went off to see a specialist and is still experiencing dizziness, 6 days later. And Trevor Clark also went off before halftime. And Shells may sort of say it's just excuses, but I guess the whatever momentum and rhythm Rovers had in that first half was kind of completely disrupted by that stop-start nature, and it did have an effect on the game. But then, the 2 penalties, certainly the first penalty, Josh Honohan should have clears Conor Cairns' long booming kick out, which is a good weapon that Shelbourne have used a few times this season against Rovers. Actually, in Talca Park, they scored from it. This time, long ball from the goalkeeper, direct down the middle. Josh Honohan kind of caught in 2 minds whether to head it or what or come for it, and he does neither and lets the ball bounce. And it's Pico Lopez on Matty Smith, I think it was, and Lopez gives the penalty away. And then second half another penalty and Lopez is sent off. So, but look, Shells just when you're top of the table like they are, and there's one stage there where they won 1 game in 9, and nobody was able to knock them off their perch at the top. Nobody was able to capitalise, and all of a sudden Shells are on a run again. The late winner against St. Pat's. They go to Rovers and they win. Like, it was a huge week for Shelbourne, and a really, really big week for the title race.
Yeah, and we might touch on Shamrock Rovers in a sec, but just on Shelbourne, I suppose, like their biggest strength, and I know a lot of times been said, is in terms of their defence, and I think there's been criticism sometimes that maybe they're a bit defensive or whatnot, but I think Damien Duff had a slight pop back at maybe critics of the way they play.
Yeah, after the game in Tala, he, I don't think anybody, I think it was put to him, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it was kind of like that people actually, do respect it, the way Shelbourne play. And Duff's attitude to it was, he's kind of miffed as to why people think just because your players are workaholics almost, and they're so well drilled and so well organized that it's immediately seen as being defensive or what have you. They're not the type of team that are going to go out and absolutely pass you off the park. I was up at the Brandywell. On the Maybank holiday covering their game against Derry City when they got a last-minute draw from Sean Boyd off the bench. And Shells, they kind of played without a recognised striker, or certainly John Martin didn't play as a recognised striker. He kind of played a bit wider. They didn't play with a striker. It was sort of false 9 type stuff. But their intention that day at the Brandywell was to try and just dominate possession and starve Derry of the ball, basically acknowledging that if Derry have the ball at home, they're going to hurt you. So Shell's tactic was basically to try and keep the ball for as long as they could, and they did that really well in the first half of that match. They were wasn't great to watch. It was kind of side to side and playing it back and what have you. There wasn't a huge kind of threat from them in that first half up in Derry, and then they go behind, so they have to come out and play, and they get the draw. So they're well able to adapt to different formations. Shells, they can adapt to different formations during matches. They can, they're never necessarily going to set out their style as you would expect. They have been kind of playing a 4-3-3 of late, but they're well able to mix it up and horses for courses against who they're playing and try different things, which I quite like in terms of Duff and his coaching staff. It's not just this is how we play and we're going to stick to this no matter what. Like they are adaptable. They do try different things, and I'm not saying it catches teams off guard or anything like that necessarily, but they're well able to mix it up and they put a decent bit of thought into how they're going to play. But yeah, look, they're not going to blow teams away by the looks of it. But they're certainly doing enough to be 6 points clear at the top of the table going into this weekend's games.
Yeah, and I think probably one of their biggest weapons in their arsenal is actually their fitness levels as well, which is incredible to watch sometimes. There's the running off the ball in terms of when it goes 90 on the clock. Just on Shamrock Rovers, really quick before we move on. I suppose one of the maybe biggest issues Shamrock Rovers has, I've seen mentioned a couple of times now, is their lack of availability of players. But is it worried that the goals they're conceding to, if you look at the moment, they've already conceded 20, which is a problem after 19 games and 20 goals. It's not a great record to have. Criticism of the goalkeeper throughout the season too. It's not all right at Shamrock Rovers moment.
No, like they're not playing bad. Like I do agree with Bradley in that a lot of the performances have been decent, but there just comes a point where how long can you keep saying that if the results aren't always marrying up? And I suppose there's just that little bit of inconsistency between Rovers playing well but not scoring enough goals to win matches and leaking goals that maybe they weren't, in previous seasons. I think they've already lost this season. I think they've already lost more goals than they did in the entirety of last season. So, it's is it an issue at Rovers, or is it the other teams are stronger this season? Like obviously a lot's been made of it being a more competitive division with Waterford and Galway up, and it's nearly become the cliche that people talk about that. The other suggestion out there is that maybe it's just not as strong a league as it used to be, and that the top teams like Rovers and Derry perhaps aren't as strong as they used to be. I am still a little undecided on that in terms of where it all lies, which, maybe I should have a harder opinion on this considering my job, but I think it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. You look at Galway United and Waterford. I think Waterford, if you ever look on any of those form tables online, I think Waterford are the form team in the league at the moment, and Galway are unbeaten in 9 games, and they're 4th in the Premier Division. So yeah, look, the Rovers issue, like they've had obviously well documented injury crisis. I think at one stage they had 11 players out who would probably walk into most other teams in the league. They've got a handful of them back. But now they've got defensive concerns, like Pico Lopez is suspended for their game in Drogheda this Friday. The Dan Cleary is injured, as we were saying there in the Shelbourne game. Josh Honohan is out with concussion. Lee Grace isn't long back in the team. He's only just back and he's building himself up. So, and Trevor Clark's out as well as wing back. Like, so there's, there are a lot of moving parts there. The goalkeeper, as you mentioned, he's shown some really good signs this season, and he's shown a few ropey ones too. And that's the danger with the goalkeeper. It's particularly, I'm not saying that there's a big sense at Rovers matches that the crowd are kind of anxious about bowls, but if ever that type of thing does seep in, it kind of seeps into the crowd. That type of stuff can even seep into the players, and there's this just general kind of anxiety over the goalkeeper, and that's not going to help matters either. But you look at, say, the postponements in the League of Ireland now over the next few days with the international call-ups. I'm sure Rovers fans would have fancied a trip to Galway on Monday, Bank Holiday Monday, and I'm sure they would have fancied, getting up for the Bows derby next Friday in Tallaght. But I guarantee you that neither Bows nor Shamrock Rovers are remotely put out by the fact that these games are off, because it allows Rovers, with Europe on their mind coming around the corner, it allows Rovers time to get players back from injury and to give a rest to lads who've been playing an awful lot. And on the Bows front, Alan Reynolds is dying to get to the transfer window and put a bit of shape on the squad himself. Do you know what I mean? So, the fact that they don't have to play Shells now and Rovers in the space of a week, I'm pretty sure that's probably music to his ears.
Yeah, so he's a happy guy. And again, I think we forget as well the schedule between now, or since March and now, has been incredibly tough for players in terms of we're at 19 games already in June, which is again maybe something has to be looked at in the future. I know they've talked about before extending the league and whatnot, but there's contract issues there. But look, before we move on from the League of Ireland, before we talk about the Irish team, the squad being announced, there's a bit of a manager around about John Daly was out of job, Stephen Kenny is back, and then John Daly's back in the job in a matter of days. What were your initial thoughts on the Stephen Kenny appointment? I know it's now 2 weeks ago since it was happened, but no harm to get your thoughts on how you think Stephen Kenny will do, or watching Stephen Kenny go back. Were you shocked when you heard
it? Not shocked in the sense that maybe 4 or 5 days before it was actually confirmed, I think it became widely known and was well reported that Pats had made him their number one target. And when you hear that type of thing at first, it's your job to try and go and dig it out and stand up the rumours and see how strong it is. I think everybody, whether you're, football fans or whether you're involved in the game or whether you're media or whoever you are, I think when you hear that first, you're kind of a little bit like, all right, okay, is he really going to come back to the League of Ireland? Because, I don't think it had been any secret that he perhaps had maybe eyes on trying something abroad first, as his first job back after the Ireland situation. I think he alluded in a couple of interviews that there may be kind of just family reasons in terms of why he's staying here at the moment. And obviously you have the whole kind of saga that is, this kind of weird soap opera thing about the Brian Kerr stuff, and Kerr obviously been he's still a big figure around St. Pat's, and whether that would be an issue. And I suppose on the face of it, if you were to go back to when the rumours first surfaced, you'd probably be a little bit surprised that Stephen would go there. But then obviously, those rumours became more and more concrete, and Pats were willing to pull out all the stops to get him on board, and I think that's been reflected in a 5.5-year contract. It was interesting you mentioned there the managerial merry-go-round and John Daly. I was at John Daly's first press conference in Oriel Park on Monday, and somebody asked him a question about it. They were kind of comparing and contrasting the strength of the squads, between St. Pat's and Dundalk, and Daly kind of made the point that he felt it was an interesting observation in terms of how people perceived the St. Pat squad, that more or less implying that, he was expected to win the title with that squad, whereas Stephen Kenny, since he's come in, has more or less said, we're not winning anything with this squad, and it's going to be a work in progress, and changes will be made, So, look, I think Kenny, which I find interesting, like Kenny when he was Dundalk manager and Ireland manager, but Kenny would always go out of his way to talk up his players. And he's obviously back in the squad he has at the moment. But in the same breath, in most of the interviews he's done, he hasn't sugarcoated the fact that the squad needs a bit of work. And this is a squad that, John Daly made 11 new signings over the close season. So that in itself was always going to be a difficult task. And I think we may have spoke about that before in terms of you bring in that amount of players, it's going to be really, really difficult to kind of hit the ground running. But Kenny certainly, he's certainly eyeing up some changes in this squad over a period of time. And he pretty much was asked, I think it was after the Derry game, his first game in charge when they lost 1-0. And I can't remember whether he was asked or he just brought it up himself. But no, he was asked, are they in the title race? Because I think they were still only 9 points off the top at that time. And he very quickly dismissed it and said, no, we're not in the title race. And he's made a point of saying we're kind of the fourth team in Dublin at the moment, behind, Rovers, Shells and Bows. So he has a big job in his hands, I think. But look, the club are certainly patient and willing to give him time, as we've seen with that contract length. So do I think Pats will challenge this season? No. But they should probably start turning in the right direction, I would imagine, sooner rather than later, although it's a very tricky game they have at home against Galway.
Yeah, and then funny enough, they Dundalk then on the Monday as well, which is an interesting game too. And look, put my Pat on for a sec. I think that in terms of the squad's probably a bit imbalanced. I think that's probably the nice way of putting it. Like a lot of centre backs. I mean, Andor Breslin was off with a hamstring injury. There's no left back in the squad to replace him, so there is issues there. And I think that's another club that can't wait to get to that period where there's a couple of weeks off with this summer break. Just really quick, then moving on to the Republic of Ireland squad coming up. Obviously, John Shea announced the squad. Probably only one real kind of big headline probably coming out was the inclusion of Tom Cannon. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That probably is a surprise in some respects. He's obviously been kind of in and around. Like, he's been capped at 21 level, and he's been in and around senior, conversations in the past. I remember last summer we were in Turkey for a training camp ahead of the Greece qualifier in Athens last summer that we lost. Ireland went to Turkey for a week before that game to kind of warm weather training camp, acclimatise. And in one of the press briefings over there, Kenny had told us that Tom Cannon had basically asked for a pause, on his international situation with Ireland. That Kenny had wanted him involved, but I think there was interest at the time from Lee Carsley actually, and England's under 21s, and so the whole thing was kind of put on hold. Cannon's agent, certainly at the time last summer, I don't know if it still is, probably is, but it is Kenny Moyes, who's a brother of David Moyes, and Stephen Kenny had looked for meetings basically with the agent and Cannon to try and get to the bottom of their international intentions, and all of that seems to have kind of been put on hold. There was certainly nothing this week to flag up in advance that Cannon was going to be involved. He's obviously part of the Leicester City squad that have been promoted back into the Premier League. And there was certainly no indication.
He hasn't played a lot though as well, I suppose. That's also an important point to make. He hasn't played a lot of football.
Yeah, he hasn't. No, I think I looked at it and it was something like 3 goals in 17 appearances, but I think a lot of them, would have been substitute appearances. And so no, like, he hasn't been kind of a leading light in Leicester's season or anything like that. But he is still there, and he is technically now going to be a Premier League player, providing he stays at the squad. But anyways, John O'Shea told us the other day that he said in his press conference that he had basically kept the lines of communication open, and O'Shea would have been a coach with the 21s, the Ireland 21s, when Cannon was playing there, so he knows all about him. And basically got a phone call from the agent to say that Tom and his family had long discussions, and we're open to playing for the senior team. So there is that weird situation, and I have to apologise because I can't. I need to go and re-look up the actual FIFA rule as such, in terms of, because it changed there a couple of years ago in terms of the amount of games a player needs to play by a certain age to be more or less tied to that country. But in theory, Cannon can play in either of these friendlies, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't tie him to Ireland. So
we've been stung before. A very highly well-known case. I suppose I won't mention his name in the podcast. I think it's 3 competitive caps, if I'm correct. I think it's 3 competitive caps you have to play.
Yeah, and but because both of these are friendlies, obviously, it just leaves that door open. But O'Shea was asked at the press conference there on during the week. He was asked specifically, do you feel he is now kind of wedded to Ireland as such? And O'Shea certainly seemed to be of that opinion, but we'll see. But look, any kind of additional, like Evan Ferguson's obviously injured, so he's not involved in either of these 2 games. So they're having a look at him, and they're having a look at another striking alternative. And if he's available and he's in camp and he's available to play in either of the games, why not?
Yeah, I think our trust has been broken as the Irish public, that when we've seen a player kiss the badge and suddenly he was togging out for another nation after 3 caps. So I think we've been down this road before. We won't mention that again. Yeah, and I suppose the other maybe inclusion that caused a slight bit of controversy just because it was personal issues recently with Shane Duffy. I think John O'Shea addressed that in the press conference as well.
Yeah, so look, it's widely reported and known now that Shane Duffy was arrested and charged after a drink driving incident in a village near Norwich at the start of the month. He did come back and play in the playoff games for Norwich against Leeds United pretty quickly. I think it was within 4 or 5 days of that incident, he was back in the team. And he was just, O'Shea was sort of asked about Duffy's inclusion in the squad and whether he had to run it past the FAI first in terms of the optics of it all. But he said nobody in the FAI. He said he didn't have to. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to ask anybody. He picked him on its merits and spoke about kind of the value that Duffy's brought to the national team over the years as a player. And he made the observation that people make mistakes and that this is a sort of a chance for redemption. And that can go down one of two ways, I guess, with people in terms of people make mistakes, but drink driving is drink driving. And Duffy still has to appear before courts in England. I think that's in early July. But O'Shea certainly was standing by Duffy and defending him and sort of saying we'll be here and we'll offer him all the support that we can possibly give him, and he's been a great servant to Ireland and that type of speak. So Duffy will be in this week for training and ahead of the 2 games. Yeah.
And he had the bat away question as well in his press conference from his former teammate, possibly made a few comments. The aforementioned Damien Duff.
Yeah, so Duff obviously did. I'd say a lot of people have heard it by now, but Duff had sat down with Richie Sadler for a podcast, Second Captain's podcast, and Sadler was. It's an interesting listen. Sadler had been asking Duff about his own intentions with Ireland, and not his intentions with Ireland, whether he was interested in the Ireland job, and Duff was, batting that away and very sort of clear that he's now interested in being the Ireland manager. And then, the conversation turned around to John O'Shea, and Duff basically made the point that he didn't feel, he's good pals with John O'Shea. Obviously, they've soldiered in the trenches with Ireland for years and years and years, but he basically didn't feel that O'Shea should have made himself available to be the interim manager again for these 2 games against Hungary and Portugal, on the basis that, O'Shea has made no secret of the fact that he wants to be the permanent manager. I guess there's a sense out there that maybe, O'Shea can't be making himself to be seen to be a doormat either, but he batted away he batted away what Duff basically said and sort of said Damien's entitled to his opinion. O'Shea's sort of stance on the matter is that these are 2 more games that I can manage my country for. I'm an inexperienced manager. He has worked, in a coaching environment at a number of clubs in England, but as a number one, like that Belgium game back in March at Aviva Stadium was the first time O'Shea's ever picked to start in 11. So he had 2 Ireland games under his belt. Now he's going to have 4 Ireland games under his belt, and God only knows where the FAI's managerial hunt stands, because there were reports maybe a month ago that O'Shea wasn't going to be considered as the Ireland manager, and then all of a sudden Jonathan Hill is no longer the CEO. David Carell is the interim CEO of the FAI, and he came out of Morning Ireland and said that John O'Shea would be under consideration along with others. So. Oh, it really is such a mess, and I know we've spoken about it before. There's no real further clarity on what's happening there, and how advanced any sort of avenues are. You'd imagine that there's a few waiting games being played with some of the teams at the Euros and what have you. But O'Shea's attitude is, if I do well in these 2 games, if they go reasonably well for me, it strengthens my hand for getting the job full time. So that's pretty much where he stands on the matter.
My gut feeling still is that's going to be really Sagnol. That's the only reason I say that is because of the comment they made about the FAI international, or about the international experience. I think his contract's up with Georgia after the Euros, and I'm just curious over that. But just even on the squad before you finish up, when you look at it in terms of maybe the attacking, I know Ferguson and Akbeni are missing. Was this the most probably in form attacking pairs you have in a while? I mean, Troy Parrott scoring 14 goals in Holland. Ida, as we know, Cup hero the other day, had a really good 6-month period at Celtic. And now, obviously, Sammy Smolix is in the squad, 27, 28 goals in the championship. I can't remember last time we've had so many probably players in an attacking sense scoring that many goals at club level.
Absolutely, yeah. And Smolix is kind of, there's links now to Turkish clubs and Galatasaray and Premier League interest. And, Smolix has had an unbelievable season, particularly for a club that, were pretty low down the championship, in terms of where they finished. The Adamida one is really interesting because, he was such a prolific scorer for Ireland at underage levels. And, I think the jury's still out. At senior level with Ida, some people are of the opinion that this guy is going to really come good. Others are not so convinced in that he's been a bit frustrating so far. But I think I think you can't underestimate the value that this loan period at Celtic is going to give him. Like people make the argument that of course he's going to score goals. It's only Scotland, but like the pressure of playing at Celtic and the pressure of having to win every single time you put on a jersey at that club, there's a lot of stuff that goes into the mix, and to be able to kind of hit the ground running like he did. And I know he didn't start every single game, but like he's made such an impact that Celtic are talking about, trying to buy him on a permanent basis for around £6 million, which is in Scotland is reasonable money, I just really think that positivity and then the heroics in the cup final, you would love to see. You'd love to see him start against Hungary, and you'd love to see him have a right go and carry that form into that game and possibly into the Portugal game as well, because I think he just needed some sort of shot in the arm like that, because when he was turning up for Ireland camps under Kenny, and Kenny was starting him in some games, he just probably didn't have a great deal of club form behind him coming into most of the windows.
And probably not playing a lot of football either, Paul. Probably come off the bench for 10, 50 minutes an hour. So he's actually playing constant football now at Celtic.
100%, yeah, exactly. And it's amazing what confidence can do in football, like for a player, and just their outlook and things, So you'd really love that to transform into this window. Like it's a real awkward window, the June window, particularly when you're not going to a tournament and these are just friendlies, and we're kind of the warm-up act for Hungary and Portugal, who are both going to the Euros. It's a hard one to get motivated for, but apart from Ogbene missing for family reasons, and then a run of injuries with John Egan, Evan Ferguson, Gavin Bazunu, Nathan Collins, pretty much the majority of the rest of the squad, Seamus Coleman, they're all here. Like they are making themselves available when it may have been easier enough to kind of duck out of these type of games. And like, don't forget this window was, months ago was kind of seen as potentially being the first camp for the new manager, and that this would be the new manager's opportunity and everybody would want to make themselves available. Well, we've interim manager John O'Shea again, but it's a decent sign that A, a lot of players are available, and B, so many of them are in decent form as well.
Yeah, before I let you go, Paul, now we're pushed for time. Just what are you hoping to see from the two games, I suppose, looking ahead? Myself, I'd like to see probably players I've mentioned, others like Jake O'Brien, Liam Scales, Mikey Johnson, probably all on the team playing maybe 2 games in a row, because I think they're probably the players that play well this season. You're picking your top 10 Irish footballers the last 12 months, they're probably in there, and don't have a lot of caps maybe as well. So is that something we want to see over the next 2 games, is them getting 78 minutes in the legs playing for Ireland?
Yeah, like that would be ideal. And I was slightly surprised that Jake O'Brien didn't get any minutes in the 2 games in March. So you would probably think that he will, and he obviously he's another who comes into the game in good form. But O'Shea, just the sense that I get from him based around the March windows and then any press events that we've had with him lately, I do still get the sense that these might be friendlies, but for him, it's almost like a job audition. And will he throw in a kind of a load of lads who may not necessarily have started previously, but only because they're in good form they might get a start? I know that logically makes sense, start the guys who are in good form, but there's something about the kind of just some of the tried and tested fellas that I just think O'Shea might revert back in a bit more experience, because make no mistakes about it, and he said it the other day, he wants to win these games. Now obviously the Portugal game is going to be very difficult because it's a star-studded Portugal squad. They're not going to be playing a B team necessarily. They could play a B team, but it's their Euro squad, so it's going to be a very good second string team, or whoever they play. They may end up playing their full strength team. We just don't know that yet. And Hungary are obviously qualified for the Euros too, so they'll be okay. O'Shea wants to win these games. He certainly doesn't want to lose them. So will there be a huge degree of experimentation? I wouldn't necessarily say so. I still think that he will rely on some of the more dependable kind of regular faces with a small sprinkling of chopping and changing.
Yeah, and all starts the Sammy Smolleck's derby next Tuesday as well, which will be, again, hopefully a decent crowd at the game for the boys in green. Paul, I'll let you go. You've been great time. Chat again soon.
Brilliant stuff, Luke. Thanks, Billy.
And just before we round up the episode, we have a little bit of audio from last week. Our reporter, Andrew Dempsey, spoke with Tom Gravosky, who's been out for a long time now. So it's great to see him back in the pitch, and he called him after the game. Let's have a listen.
Yeah, so Tom, I suppose a reaction on tonight, 3-0 win, clean sheet, happy enough, I suppose?
Oh yeah, good night. Obviously good for me to get minutes coming back from injury, and a few of the lads who maybe haven't had that many minutes in the first team to get it, and then to see the young lads play with a few of the first team players. I think they've done brilliant. I obviously played with them last week, and they were unbelievable. So it's good to see them playing in front of a few fans with a few first team players and seeing how they got on, and I thought they done really well.
Yeah, I know kind of touched on it there, but look, it's a long road back for you. So I suppose, is it relief more? Is that the main emotion at the moment? Just to be back on the pitch?
I would say relief. Obviously, there's a lot of hard work went into last year. A few setbacks and stuff like that. So I just like, not pride, but like I realised how hard it's been, and to get back, and it's not easy. So I'm just really happy and how I'm feeling and stuff like that. Like, it's alright coming back and not feeling the best, but I feel good and I feel like I can impact the team when I come back, which is the main thing, and hopefully many more games to come.
Yeah, I forgive me for ignorance though. Was that the first ever long-term injury you had?
No, I haven't. I've had that's why I left Scotland. I had a long-term injury. I had a couple of operations and stuff like that, and that's how I ended up coming here. So I had a good 1 year, and obviously I had the bad injury last year, but hopefully I can put it behind me now and just crack on.
Yeah, because obviously, look, I suppose you look at the league table, you talk about cracking on, like you might be down low, probably not as high in the league table as you'd like to be, but you're not a million miles off that top 4, top 3.
No, that's it. Like, it's the league's mad. Like, put a couple of wins together and we'll be right back in the mix, but it's easier said than done in this league. But I think we've improved in the last couple of weeks. We were so unlucky on Friday not to come away with it, and obviously conceding a goal against Shells, but we're not far away. We just need to put a complete performance together, and sure, a few wins, confidence up, and we can go on a run.
Yeah, and I suppose even the defeats, they've only been by the odd goal, haven't they?
Yeah, it's tight. Like, all the games are tight, so we just need to make sure we're coming out on the right side of these tight games, and look to get a couple of results before the break and kick on, because you'll have so many important games after the break with Europe, the cup starting and stuff like that. So we need to start getting on the right end of these tight games.
Yeah, and how has Stephen been to? I know he's only been in about 10 days at this stage, but how have things been there?
No, really good, really impressed with the manager. He's obviously, his record speaks for itself. But no, just his football knowledge and his knowledge on the league's been unbelievable to see, and I'm really looking forward to working with him going forward.
Yeah, is probably one of the most exciting parts of, I suppose, that last while of getting to work. You know, obviously John did a great job here before, but obviously with Stephen coming in, probably a massive name. Is that exciting for you guys as well?
Yeah, it is. Obviously, I had a great relationship with John, and he'd done a great job here, and it's really sad to see him go, but obviously that's football, and you just hope you get a good manager in then, and so far the gaffer's been really good, and like, really excited to play for him, so been good.
Yeah, I suppose he's kind of kept the same coaches around here, so that probably helps, does it, in terms of familiarity?
Yeah, it does, yeah. Obviously Sean, he's still here, Graham, Kelly and stuff like that, so yeah, it's not going to be a complete change, but it keeps the familiarity, and adding the gaffers little bits is good. I'm sure we've had a lot of games recently, so it's been hard for the gaffers to come in. We've had 3 games in a week, so I'll say this week having a full week's training, and we'll start to see the benefits.
Yeah, and obviously Galway on Friday night, a big game.
Yeah, massive game. Got a good couple of home games coming up, so we're going to look to get points on the board, and hopefully this can be the one that we can put together just before the break.
Perfect. Tom, thanks, man.
And then to wrap up, just let's go through the fixtures this week in the SSC Electricity League. Start with Friday night, we have Waterford Bohemians, Drogheda United Shamrock Rovers, Dundalk Derry City, St Pat's Athletic Galway, and Shelbourne Sligo Rovers. On Monday night, then we could postponements, but we have a couple of games still in the Round Division. We have Sligo Rovers, Drogheda United at 5 o'clock on Monday, St Pat's Dundalk at 5:15, and at 6 o'clock we also have Derry City against Waterford. In the first division, we have Treaty United against Longford Town, UCD against Bray, Athlone Town v Cork, Finn Harps Wexford, and Cove Ramblers Kerry, all on Friday night. And then on the Monday night, we have Wexford Longford Town at 3 p.m. The rest of the games are all at 5 and they are as follows: Kerry Treaty United, Finn Harps Athlone Town, Cork City UCD, and Bray Wanderers against Cove Ramblers. And as mentioned earlier on, we also have the international games coming up for the men's and women's. Start with women's, we have a Friday night, Republic of Ireland against Sweden, and then the return leg then on the Tuesday night, Sweden take on Republic of Ireland. And then the men's team, we also have the Tuesday night, Republic of Ireland against Hungary in the Aviva Stadium. Bush and I will be back with the Extratime.com voice notes podcast, probably in your podcast feed for Saturday morning. I want to thank our guest, Macdara first, Paula here. I want to thank you for listening, and we'll chat to you all next week.